honorable panelists and student participants. We are Group 4 from the training program on the UN with the Hope to the Future Association. My name is Sebam Cook.
I am Chiang Song.
I am Tagyam Lee.
I am Donghyun Han.
I'm Yunsu Kang.
It is a great honor to participate in this meaningful event with the teachers, Hope to the Future officials, and UN delegates. During the program, our group mainly focused on learning about different projects and contents in conjunction with the UNDP and Sustainable Development Goal number 8. The reason why we chose this topic is because we felt that now is the perfect time to discuss the direction of future developments after the pandemic has settled down. So today, we will deliver our final presentation on sustainable economic growth, the post-COVID-19 era through the lenses of the UNDP. We will also discuss our reports and findings in the end. This is the agenda that we have for today. First of all, we will look into the UN Sustainable Development Goals, especially number 8, and then we'll relate the goals back to our own status quo. After analyzing what the problems inside the status quo are, our team will then talk about how the organizations like UNDP deal with them by looking into specific examples and cases. And finally, in the last part of our presentation, we will provide you with our own evaluations of the methods and our own policy suggestions for the future. So let's dive right in. In 2015, the United Nations established the Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the Global Goals. They were built on the foundation of Millennium Development Goals. The 17 SDGs have 169 specific targets that call nations worldwide to action, promoting social, economic, cultural, and sustainable growth within the global community. As the 5 Ps suggests, the SDGs specifically serve to enhance the livelihood of individuals, protect the environment, and promote peace and prosperity. But most importantly, the main characteristic of the SDGs is the fact that all 17 goals and targets are essentials and they're interconnected. Collective action is necessary to achieve all of the global goals. Yet, our team today would like to specifically focus on one goal, SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth. As its title indicates, SDG 8 entails promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth while pursuing a society with productive employment and decent work. So, what does sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth actually mean? Sustainable economic development can be defined as economically developing and satisfying our human needs without hurting the environment. In the meantime, inclusive development is a type of economic growth that promotes general welfare, giving everyone in society an equal opportunity. Finally, sustained economic development, which is the overarching theme, is a development that can be maintained and perpetuated throughout time. In short, SDG 8 aims to foster a development that considers the environment, the people, and future generations. These are some targets under SDG number 8. Now, the question is, how is SDG 8 and its mission related to our current society today?
The outbreak of the global pandemic COVID-19 from last year added a layer of problems on top of the already existing social issues, including poverty, inequalities, climate emergency, and many more. This global context pertaining to COVID-19 can be called the VUCA world. As you see in the slide, V in VUCA stands for volatile. Surges of virus spread and natural disasters are unexpected disturbances. These changes occur much more often than before, thus requiring continuous analysis and evaluation to seek solutions. U is for uncertain and C is for complex. As aforementioned, the volatile and uncertain global events make it difficult for people to identify, predict, and prioritize the factors that may influence a certain situation. Lastly, A stands for ambiguous. Rapid technological innovations, along with the increasing digital divide, make it difficult to interpret the endless amounts of information and explain new processes and events. In brief, in such a multifaceted world, humanity has become more susceptible ever than before to changes, in this case, the pandemic. Now, let's deeply take a look into the correlation between COVID-19 and the SDG 8's mission to sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth. To begin with, the pandemic created lasting legacies disrupting sustained growth. Although the global growth is expected to accelerate to 5.6% this year, thanks to major economies such as the United States and China, the level of global GDP in 2021 is expected to be 3.2% below pre-pandemic projections. Moreover, according to ILO, 25 million people have lost their jobs, with the loss of income accounting to $3.4 trillion on a global scale. Expectedly, as a consequence, the Human Development Index dropped by over 700% from the year 2019 to 2020. Furthermore, the COVID-19 pandemic gave birth to various economic inequalities, negatively impacting inclusive growth. The most vulnerable groups, such as the elderly, disabled personnel, children, women, internally displaced people, and refugees, are the ones being hit hardest by the novel virus. For example, schools for more than 168 million children globally have been completely closed for almost the full year since 2020. In the meantime, since the pandemic outbreak, the total amount of refugees and migrants has increased by 500,000. Lastly, sustainable growth has also been halted by the pandemic. Although the decrease of human activities did alleviate environmental issues, such as showing a 6% drop in greenhouse gas emissions in the fiscal year of 2020, this still falls short of the required annual reduction rate set by the Paris Climate Agreement, which is 7.6%. Moreover, new records of the summer temperatures are being updated every year, and making the matters worse, many climate movements, such as strikes to appeal for stronger environmental policies, have been canceled or postponed indefinitely. Overall, the COVID-19 pandemic, regardless of geographic boundaries, has affected everyone, including the most vulnerable, and has inflicted an irreparable scar on the global economy by triggering numerous shocks. So these statistics serve as more than enough evidence that our world desperately needs to achieve the SDGs. Our complex, uncertain world full of clusters of megatrends embraces different categories of rapid technological development, demography shifting powers, and environmental pressures. The single event of COVID-19 outbreak sparked health issues, economic inequalities, social polarization, and impacted our response to climate change. The need for diverse perspectives and incorporation of various factors to solve this singular issue is parallel to the interlinked and indivisible nature of the UN SDGs. In particular, SDG 8, which reinforces social and environmental goals of the sustainability agenda by promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, is pivotal in determining our faith in the post-pandemic era.
Among numerous international organizations that serve to spearhead the United Nations global goals, the United Nations Development Program is the agency we plan to focus on today. To start with a brief history, the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP in short, was established in 1965 from a merger of two United Nations departments, United Nations Expanded Program of Technical Assistance and United Nations Special Fund. Now, serving as a separate agency under the General Assembly, the program has been established with visions to support countries in eliminating poverty, achieving sustainable human development, and emphasizing the importance of resource and nature conservation. Since 1965, the UNDP continuously grew rapidly in size, and today acts as the UN's largest development assistance program. While the organization has its headquarters in New York, the UNDP works with its international offices located in 170 countries and territories, along with its 6 policy centers around the world. With the existing offices and departments, the UNDP continuously works in cooperation with other associations and governments to develop policies and institutional capabilities. Taking a deeper look into the organization, the UNDP pursues three main areas of focus or development challenges: eradication of poverty, accelerating structural transformations for sustainable development, and building resilience to crises and shocks, which are all tightly knitted with the SDG 8's targets, and which we will closely observe one by one. So let's begin with the first area of focus, the eradication of poverty. Today, an estimated 700 million people live below the threshold of extreme poverty set at $1.90 per day, and 80% of the world lives on less than $10 a day. Moreover, an estimated 1.3 billion people are projected to suffer from multidimensional poverty, especially during the pandemic. As poverty is caused by multifaceted factors, including poor health and lack of education, it should be clearly noted that the SDG 8 is indeed one of the main goals of the UNDP. Recognizing the urgency that is needed to take actions, the UNDP looks at both inequalities and poverty in order to leave no one behind, and focuses on dynamics of exiting poverty and not falling back. This requires addressing interconnected social, economic, environmental, and governance challenges that drive people into poverty. Thus, the UNDP works to ensure that responses are multi-sectoral and coherent from global to local. In short, the UNDP's signature solutions on poverty cuts across the works on all the SDGs, whether it's decent work or peace and justice.
The second main development challenge of the UNDP is building resilience to crises and shocks. Today, numerous crises such as climate change, disasters, violent extremism, financial volatility, epidemics, and food insecurity impede progress on sustainable economic growth. Crisis knows no borders. More than 1.6 billion people live in fragile and conflict-affected settings, including 600 million young people. More people have been uprooted from their homes by war and violence and sought sanctuary elsewhere than at any time since the Second World War. Just during the fiscal year of 2020, more than 150 local, regional, and international violent conflicts occurred, giving birth to over 82.4 million refugees in total. Climate disasters, on the other hand, are also creating an average of 14 million refugees every year. Therefore, in order for nations, whether they are affected by crisis or not, to achieve sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, UNDP's roles in building resilience to shocks are inevitable. UNDP helps reduce these risks by supporting countries and communities to better manage conflicts, prepare for major shocks, recover in their aftermath, and integrate risk management into their development planning. The sooner that people can get back to their homes, jobs, and schools, the sooner that they can start thriving again. By implementing this signature solution, the agency focuses on capacities to address root causes of conflict, reduce disaster risk, mitigate and adapt to climate change impacts, recover from crisis, and build sustainable peace. This has an impact that not only prevents or mitigates crisis, but also has an effect on people's everyday lives across all SDGs. The final main development challenge of the UNDP is accelerating structural transformations for sustainable development. It is important to note that a decent structural framework is crucial to bringing sustainable development to fruition and reality. Without proper structural transformation, eradication of poverty or building resilience to crisis are just illusions. According to the agency, the ineffective, unaccountable, non-transparent government institutions and processes hamper the ability of states to achieve fully sustained, inclusive, and sustainable growth. To achieve structural transformation, the UNDP focuses on forming governance for peaceful, just, and sustained societies, fostering green growth and engaging women's empowerment and gender equality. To form peaceful, just, and sustained societies, the UNDP communicates with a wide range of institutions, from national parliaments, Supreme Court, and national civil services through regional and local administrations. To achieve sustainable economic growth, the UNDP also promotes nature-based solutions for development and clean, affordable energy directions to ensure all people have plenty of clean water, food, air, and live along the low-carbon technology. Also, to achieve inclusive development, the agency supports nationals and communities to implement public policies that advance gender equality and the empowerment of women. Thus, there is no doubt that the UNDP again plays a pivotal role in pursuing the SDG 8 in our global community.
Now that you are acquainted with UNDP's key objectives, challenges, and visions, let me introduce you to what kind of more specific methods or tools the UNDP utilizes to achieve SDG 8 in the global community. The answer lies in understanding the development cooperation. The development cooperation is a multilateral cooperation under the UNDP that aims to provide assistance to developing countries by promoting their long-term, sustained, sustainable, and inclusive human development. To be more specific, the term supports and complements efforts of developing countries to guarantee the provision of universal social basic standards to their citizens, converge to a higher level of income and well-being, correcting extreme international inequalities, and provide international public goods. Now, the UNDP majorly oversees or uses three different operational approaches, which are North-South cooperation, which includes official development assistance, South-South cooperation, and finally, triangular cooperation. The distinction between these methods is the matter of which stakeholders its method takes. The first method we would like to spotlight is the North-South cooperation. North-South cooperation is a broad framework for development cooperation between the North and the South in the political, economic, social, cultural, and environmental domains. The division of North and South is not faithful to the actual geographical division, but depends on certain economic factors and the quality of life of its populations. In other words, North indicates advanced countries, while South refers to the developing countries. In North-South cooperation, developed countries foster economic, scientific, and technological self-reliance of developing countries through providing financial help and sharing their knowledge, technology, expertise, and resources. The special feature of North-South cooperation is that it acts as a communication bridge between the developing countries and developed countries. Through North-South cooperation, developed countries aid and share their advanced knowledge and innovative technologies in the developing countries. This way, developing countries can move one step closer to achieve sustainable development with use of existing capacity. An example of the use of this cooperation is Italy launching a project for Sahel for famine and degradation damage in 1982. For another instance, China donated 700,000 doses, and the US 3 million doses of single-dose Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine to Afghanistan in early 2020. This cooperation proved how multilateral cooperation can solve crises such as the pandemic.
The financial branch of the North-South cooperation is distinguished as Official Development Assistance, so-called ODA. ODA is defined by the OECD Development Assistance Committee as vertical government aid from the donor country that provides and targets the economic development and welfare of developing countries. The Development Assistance Committee adopted ODA as the gold standard of foreign aid in 1969, and it still remains as a main source of financing for development aid. Just to be clear, military aid and promotion of donors' security interests or transactions that have primarily commercial objectives like export credits are not classified as ODA. ODA initiates inclusive economic growth for all by aiding multilateral development institutions, countries, and territories on the DAC list of ODA recipients in terms of budget support, and even provides scholarships in donor countries. Then, what are successful examples of the ODA? South Korea was indeed one of the most successful cases of reviving from an economic recession after receiving ODA. After the liberation of Japanese colonial rule in 1945 until the late 1990s, Korea was one of the poorest nations in the world. However, after receiving a total of $12.7 billion from the ODA, the assistance provided a foundation enabling Korea to take a giant leap forward in economic development, which resulted in phenomenal socioeconomic development. Even though it is difficult to evaluate the impact and actual efficacy of the ODA, in an extensive global study published in 2010, 3 research workers at the University of Copenhagen calculated that international aid added a substantial amount of additional growth in developing countries. Next off, South-South Cooperation, or SSC, is a cooperation between 2 developing countries in the Global South. It means that one country that is more developed in a certain area assists other developing countries in the development of that area. In general, neighboring developing countries tend to have similarities, including language, culture, and the climate. Thus, SSC allows the donor countries to help clients that they already know pretty much well about. The way SSC contributes to building inclusive global economic growth is by promoting a large number of knowledge and expertise exchanges through programs, projects, and initiatives that have solved the specific problems in the countries of the Global South. One example of the use of SSC is the development fund provided by the Cambodian capital to fellow developing nations like India and South Africa in exchange for the knowledge of robust development of national welfare policy and a youth volunteering scheme. It provided how SSC provides a large number of knowledge and expertise exchanges. Another example is enhancing teacher education in Africa. From 2012 to 2016, Congo, Ivory Coast, Ethiopia, Liberia, Namibia, Tanzania, and Uganda shared to cooperatively develop national key teacher education and training institutions to provide quality teacher education and training. In this way, the developing countries built the capacity of education for each other.
Another method the UNDP uses to pursue the UN SDG 8 is triangular cooperation, also known as North-South-South cooperation. The triangular cooperation features 3 main stakeholders, 1 developed or North nation, and 2 South or developing nations. In some cases, a South-South cooperation can change to a triangular cooperation. Usually, the transition of a South-South cooperation into a triangular cooperation is when the developing nation or South nation providing assistance, the SSC has restrictions on its capability, such as insufficient funds. The developed nation would have to play multiple roles and help in several ways like funding, technological support, and experience. Moving on, one example of triangular cooperation is between Germany, Morocco, and Costa Rica. In this cooperation, Germany functioned as the developed or North nation, offering financial assistance and information regarding the methodology and organization it gained from its past experiences in cooperation. The cooperation led to many positive results. Costa Rica in the last 20 years has made large strides in protecting and conserving the country's environment and natural resources. Costa Rica shared the various experiences, insights, and tips gathered in the 20 years with Morocco. Some examples of the information that was shared were about Costa Rica's experiences in developing and creating certain policies with forest and environment partnership groups. This information greatly helped Morocco with developing their own national strategy on protected areas to preserve natural and cultural heritage as a part of visions of sustainable development for Morocco.
Although the 3 development cooperation methods that our team just explained have met a lot of success in the global community, they have rooms for improvements. To start with specific shortcomings of certain methods, ODA donors or the developed countries have continuously used an incompatible form of financial model in the ODA. The process has been more of inventing numbers that do not exist in the real world. For example, The countries use the grant equivalent model, which is only credible if donors work out the present value of repayments using current market interest rates. Yet in 2014, the DAC decided instead to use the fixed discount rates of 6, 7, or 9%, which is systematically wrong. To solve this issue, donors of the ODA must work out the present value of repayments using current market interest rates. Moreover, ODA is criticized for its bias and somewhat ineffective aids that rather benefit the donor countries. For example, such type of aid types like imputed cost of education for foreign students in a donor country, subsistence of refugees inside the donor countries, and development awareness programs in the donor countries do not necessarily benefit the recipients, but are more focused on the donor's interest. To deal with such problems, the international community, including the UNDP, must narrow down the specific aid type based on the situation of the developing nations to provide what the recipient countries really need. In terms of SSC, weak institutional setup and framework is a shortcoming. Developing countries that are involved in SSC suffer from huge coordination and harmonization problems, and many do not have clear assignments of responsibilities of SSC. They also lack capacity to assert and develop ownership in the projects and programs. To tackle this issue, triangular cooperation could be a good way for the developing nations to receive advice from the developed countries. Thus, the UN and other global organizations should work on establishing the clear guidelines of the South-South cooperation, as well as encouraging triangular cooperation.
Now that the specific shortcomings have been explained, let me outline some of the general shortcomings of the development cooperation world itself. First of all, the developed world's research monopoly created a skewed research agenda that tilted heavily towards the challenges of particular importance and interest of the North, causing the South to reap minimal benefits. We suggest developed countries to consider not only their interests when creating research agendas, but also those of the developing countries. In addition, many development cooperation projects lack capacity in project management. Many have not yet decided the proper guidelines or expertise to engage in such projects, and therefore they come with high risks and costs. To solve this issue, the UN and other United Nations agencies should assemble to carry out risk analysis of various factors, revise guidelines, and invest in development cooperation. In conclusion, with thinning multilateralism, cooperation is what we need. Although the development cooperation methods produce productivity and shared benefits among the countries involved, they have shortcomings that need to be addressed. Generally, the methods are tilted towards the developed countries for they take advantage for their 50+ years of development cooperation experience. But after all, what we really need is collective and cooperative action. The Sustainable Development Goals have been made on the fair ground of solidarity between the developed and developing nations. Therefore, it only makes sense for the international community to work together to reduce the shortcomings, making more analysis and attempts. There's no doubt that the pandemic hit us hard. However, it also sprouted an era of new opportunity to promote multilateralism and to bring about sustained, inclusive, and sustainable growth. This marks the end of Team 4's presentation on sustainable economic growth, the post-COVID-19 era through the lens of UNDP. Thank you all so much for tuning in to learn about how the UN and UNDP specifically can use collective action to solve waves of economic issues brought by the pandemic.
Thank you very much. For those who have questions, please raise your hand. We'll only accept 1 or 2 questions. Okay, Seokhyun, please go ahead. And Sue is the same. Okay.
Okay, so thank you
Go
guys.
ahead.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for your presentations. I liked how you guys actually analyzed and recommended at the end instead of merely stating facts. So that was very enjoyable. But to ask about aids from the UN and UNDP, for example, if you look at COVID-19, people are unemployed, and as you said, we lost 3.4 trillion in economy. So, and if you look at the middle class and the lower class, they are on the verge of eviction. So if you look at the CDC and the US, they provided an eviction moratorium if you don't know what moratorium means, it's an agreement to provide funds, and eviction means to be basically being kicked out of your house because you didn't pay the loans. Then what can the UNDP do for those developing countries? As you stated, even though India has a 2.8 trillion GDP, they have several people, billions of people that live in illiteracy and under about merely $2 or $1 a day. So what can the UNDP do at this point? Like putting US as an idol, as their prospect, and providing funds such as the eviction moratorium or any other funds at this point to allow the developing countries to sustain and allow their citizens to live a better life in terms of quality of life and the HDI ranking.
So I'll go ahead and answer your question. Thank you, Seokhyun, so much for the question. I think it's really important and it's really specific. So thank you for the question. To give you an example from our side, we're not completely sure about how to address this question, like in which facet, but we think that the developed countries, it is really pivotal that the developed countries try to support the developing countries in the international community. The UN itself don't have like a sense of cohesion since it is not really binding, and except the UNSC. We cannot specify which specific activity we can do, and as a youth level, as presenters, we cannot like completely represent the UNDP and actions. So since the UN is not legally binding, they cannot do something specific. It's just that the developed countries must help the developing countries through the development cooperation methods, the three main ones, the NSC, SSC, and ODA that we've just specified. And as I mentioned and emphasized in the end, it's really important for all nations to do collective action and promote solidarity. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you guys so much for your presentation. That was a lot of information to digest. So you guys mentioned a lot about like ODAs. I just want to ask like a clarification question. When it comes to the UNDP's ODAs, are developed nations allowed to have conditions for developing nations in exchange for their like assistance? Like, are they allowed to say, like, if the US is going to give Korea like $1 million, are they allowed to say you need to tighten your labor market, you need to like liberalize your foreign capital? Like, are they allowed to hold conditions in exchange for giving this aid, or is that not allowed under the UNDP?
Teammates, should I just also answer this one? Is that okay? Okay, so to answer your question, Suli, also thank you for the question. In the case of ODA, not all developed or developing countries cannot just accept any country in that transaction or that development cooperation. So because the countries have to evaluate like the standards and GDP and everything, but like in a like general perspective, they do not really look at the political stance because it will be a little bit biased, and different countries have different economic, political like structures. We will probably have to search more about the UNDP and what the countries involved in ODA like evaluate like while trying to initiate the ODA. However, since every single country that participated in the ODA project do not report on why they chose selective countries to start ODA transactions with, we cannot give you a definite answer, but that's a very good point, and we'll definitely try to research more on that.